Hi everyone, how's it going? Hope you're all doing very well today, and welcome to FMDataLab. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come and see what FMDataLab is all about. So, what is FMDataLab and how can it enhance your Football Manager player recruitment? Well, FMDataLab is a free-to-use web application that allows you to upload player data, export it from your Football Manager save. FMDataLab then analyzes a player's attributes to calculate their proficiency in various position roles. You can view all of your exported player scores for each position role that you've selected in a table that will not only contain the player's scores for each role, but also additional data like their age, height, club, etc. The table has the capacity to sort and filter in columns to refine your query to aid in your search for your next star player. You can also emulate your Football Manager tactics in FMDataLab to rank a player's role score within each position role of your tactic, essentially meaning you can find the best player to fit your in-game tactic. For those of you who, like myself, might be a little bit addicted to Football Manager, you're probably aware of how the roles within Football Manager work. For each position, there are a number of different roles, each with a specific playstyle. Each of the roles apply weighting to particular player attributes. You can see on screen now an example. These weightings are those attributes that are highlighted in green and blue. The attributes that are highlighted in green stipulate a higher weighting, which equates to a multiplier of sorts, defining that those are key attributes that are deemed to be important for a player to succeed in that role. The attributes that are highlighted in blue are seen to be preferable for that role, but not as important as the attributes that are highlighted in green. So using these highlighted attributes within each role, as well as another weighting system, is what I have employed to calculate the role scores for each player out of 20. I will go in more depth on how I calculate these scores in a future video for those who are interested. Before we get into the meat of it, I guess I should preface all this that I'd started this project back in the end of September of 2023. This had come off the back of various different spreadsheets to calculate role-based scores, but the more data and the more logic I inevitably added, they would eventually just start to crash to the point where it was taking minutes to even try and open them. So that's when I said I'd move over to building a Python application which didn't crash and could handle thousands of players' data, but it was my first experience of using Python, so probably wasn't the most efficient piece of software I'd ever written, but I decided I would maybe make these calculations more publicly available and using a programming language I'm more familiar with that I use in my day-to-day job, so that's where FMDataLab was created. Unfortunately, for me anyway, some of you might be aware I was sort of pipped to the post in making a role-based scoring web app. A YouTuber by the name of Squirrel Plays had created one back in November. It's a really good web app. I've used it myself. That was initially based on a Python code that he created and actually shared how it all worked on YouTube, which is really interesting seeing how it compared to my old Python app. It's actually sort of similar. But I would be remiss not to direct you to his videos, as he goes into a lot of detail on how his scoring works and how to use his web app that he developed with two other developers. I can obviously see why it would be very easy to draw a lot of comparisons between our two web apps, as they are very similar, but our calculations do vary. And the truth is, I was probably about 60% of the way through this project when he had released his, and I didn't really want to ditch this project after putting as much effort into it as I have, and I did take a break over Christmas and January, and after that I just kept adding new features, but finally we're here in all its glory. So with that bit of admin out of the way, let's get back into how you can use FMDataLab. So first up is signing up. The reason for this login flow is so you can upload files that will get directly linked to your account. So no need to have to continually re-upload every time you want to get the role scores for the players in your exported file. So when you're on FMDataLab here, you can simply click on the sign up button. Once on the registration page, you can click the sign up with Google button. You'll then be prompted to select the Google account you wish to sign up as. Once you've signed up, you will be presented with this onboarding experience. All the onboarding details are included in the tutorials section here, so you can go through each one of these if you wish. But I will walk through each step here in this video so you can follow along. So this just first step is a basic summary of what FMDataLab is, so we can go on to the next step. This step is all about downloading the specific views that you need to import into your Football Manager save and are required to use for FMDataLab. These views have all the necessary columns required for the calculations. Without these columns, you'll be prone to errors and loss of data integrity. There are 3 different view files to download, one for the player search screen, another for the shortlist screen, and the final one is for squad screens. Important to note here is that you will be able to use the squad view on both your own squad screen and also on opposition squads. Clicking the download button here will bring you to a MediaFire page where you can download these views. So just click the download button and that will download for you. Once you've downloaded the zip folder, let's go to the next step. This step covers how to import the views within the downloaded zip folder into your Football Manager save. I do have some handy short text and video tutorials on this page on how to achieve this for all of the views, but I will go over each one of them now. The first step of this part is to make sure the view files are accessible on Football Manager. You can see here on the left window I have the zip folder we just downloaded from MediaFire, and on the right I have the Football Manager directory. I believe in most cases the Football Manager directory will be found within the Sports Interactive directory, which will also be in your documents. Within the Football Manager directory here, make sure you have the views folder. If you've never created a view before, import a view, you might not have one as it doesn't come out of the box whenever you're installing Football Manager. If you do not have this views folder, be sure to create one. We'll then move all the contents from the zip folder into the views folder in the Football Manager directory, so you can extract whatever. I know there's like 1,000 ways of doing this, but I'm just going to do it like this. You want to make sure that those three files here, the player search, the shortlist, and the squad view files, are within your views folder within Football Manager. Now, with that bit done, let's move over to Football Manager. So now we're within Football Manager, let's actually add the views we just downloaded onto each specific screen. So let's start with the player search screen. You're going to want to select the scouting tab in the navigation, hover over players here, select players in range. Now this is the player search view. So you come down here to this view button, hover over custom, select import view. You're going to want to make sure that you're within the views directory within the Football Manager directory, and you'll see these three files we just moved over. You're also going to want to select the player search view because you're on the player search screen. So just select the file, click load, and you should see this success message appear. So this view includes certain player details that will exist within the FMDataLab table for you to sort and filter on, but namely includes all of the attributes required for all the calculations. So you can see here you get some of the details, and way over here is all of the attributes. So let's do the other screens now. So let's go to shortlist up here, click shortlist again, go over down to this view button, hover over custom, select import view, and you're going to want to select the shortlist view because we're on the shortlist page, and then we're all good with that one too. So let's go over to our squads, same again, selecting this view button, hover over custom, select import view, and then select squad view because we're on the squad screen. As I did mention before, you can also do opposition. So let's just pick a random team here, select the players option here, do the senior squad, either whatever squad you want honestly. Go over to the view. So since we've already done the squad view and imported it, it will be available here, but again you can't just import it. So let's select squad view, and there you go. Happy days, we're all done, easy peasy. So before we get into the interesting part, I do need to go over some caveats and restrictions that are applied within FMDataLab. First up, as mentioned already, do make sure you are using the correct view for the correct screen. If you try and import another custom view or edit the view in any way, you will be prone to errors and columns may be missing. You also want to make sure that you have the English UK language selected in game. English US also works, it just switches the salary column to be wage. That was the only breaking change I did find when switching to the US. In a perfect world, I would handle all in-game languages, but each language has their own column names, which makes it a little tricky on my end, but it's definitely something that I have on my roadmap. So within the Football Manager preferences here, so if you click on the FM logo, go preferences, you can see the English language is selected. If you go over to advanced and then go to formats and you scroll down to the bottom, you will see these two options. So there's decimal symbol and there's digit grouping symbol. You're going to want decimal symbol to be dot and digit grouping symbol to be comma. The reason being is that if you use a number like 1000, for example, and you use dot for the digit grouping symbol, the code will see 1000 as 1 and not 1000 as it would be 1.000 and not 1,000. It won't break any of the calculations, but if you do wish to filter and sort based on wage or transfer, it won't work as expected. FMDataLab will work if you have the player attribute masking enabled. I'm not one of those people, I like seeing all the attributes, so just be aware if you do have player attribute masking enabled, it will select the middle of the range when it comes to an attribute. For example, if an attribute's value is 11 to 15, the code will interpret this as the attribute value being 13, even if the actual attribute might be 15 for example. So If you do have player attribute masking enabled, my advice is to ensure that you have fully scouted the players that you're exporting before importing them into FMDataLab. In regards to some restrictions, these are all based on keeping down potential bandwidth cost with the hosting provider I'm using for the web app. For the first month or so, I will track the hosting costs, and if only a small percentage of bandwidth is used, I will lift or be more lenient on some of these restrictions. So apologies for these restrictions at the moment, but it is what it is. First restriction there is that there is a limit of 12 files per user. If you do need to upload more files, you can delete an old file and replace it with a new one. There's also a limit of a max of 5,000 players that can be exported from Football Manager into FMDataLab. This is one I definitely want to increase. 5,000 might be a little restrictive to some, but just for now, you may need to refine your search criteria before exporting. Off the back of the player limit, there is also a file limit of 8 megabytes, which shouldn't be an issue, but it's there just to catch any potential footgun issues. There's also currently a max selection of 11 roles when it comes to selecting the roles you wish to calculate, but that should cover all roles within any given tactic. So let's go to the next step, which is all about exporting the Football Manager data from the imports we just added. So again, I have short text and video tutorials here on how you can do this for each of the views, but I'll just jump into Football Manager now and show you myself. Clicking on the Scouting tab here in the navigation, I'm going to go back over to Players, select Players from Range. I'll reiterate, do make sure you have the correct view selected. So here we're on the player search screen, make sure the FMDataLab player search view is the current view you're looking at. To export, we need to do a few things. You need to click on the first player in the list, like so. Then on Windows, you want to click Control and A. If you're on Mac, it's Command and A. This will highlight all the players in the list. Clicking on anything else here can mess up with this selection, I found, so be careful of that. If you do have a lot of players in this row, or a bit like myself, have an older machine, it might take a minute, but don't fret. It will eventually do it. So once all the selections have been made, you want to press Control P if you're on Windows, or Command P on Mac, and that will bring up this print dialog. And you'll want to select Web Page, and then click OK. So we present it with this File Explorer dialog. You will need to select where you want to export this file. It will be exported as a HTML file. I just have it in the folder within the Football Manager directory, but you can store it wherever it's convenient to you. As long as you remember where it's located, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm just going to call this one Player Search, if I could spell, and then just click Save. Now let's do the other two screens. The process will be pretty much the same. So go over to Shortlist, click Shortlist here. Again, I'm going to keep reiterating this because I think this is probably where most people's pitfalls will lie, is make sure you have the FMDataLab shortlist view selected when you're in the shortlist view. Then select the first player, then select all by doing Control A or Command A, then select Control P or Command P to bring up the print dialog, make sure web page is selected, select OK. Then you can go back into the folder wherever you saved it. I'm going to call this one Shortlist. Spelled it right this time, well done. And then we'll do the final one, which is over on the squad screen. Make sure the squad view is the selected view. Select the first player in the list, hit Control A or Command A to select all, then select Control P or Command P, bring up the print dialog, select web page, OK, go wherever you saved the other ones, and we'll do squad, spell everything right. So we're all good. So that's pretty much it for what you need to do within Football Manager. So let's go back to the website again. So back on to FMDataLab, let's go to the next step, which is all about uploading this data we just exported from Football Manager. Press the upload button here, which will bring up a little dialog. You will then be presented with 3 different fields. There's name, which is the display name of this file. So choose a relevant one. It may be like your player search for the mid-season transfer window, for example, but I'm just going to call this player search. And I did well that time, I spelled it right. The file type, which at the moment doesn't really do anything other than display an UI, but will most likely be used in the future in some capacity, I'm just going to select player search. And finally, file, which is going to be one of the files we just exported from Football Manager, one of the HTML files. So once you click on this field, it will bring you to your file explorer and you can select any of the files you just exported. So I'm going to do a player search, and it's the HTML file. So once you've added a name, file type and file, you can click the add file button. You'll be brought to this role selection screen. From here you can select all the position roles you wish to run calculations on to get scores for each of the selected roles for all the players within your exported file. You can select from all of the roles for all of the positions. You can see here there's every single one. Take note that there are some roles that span across multiple positions, so those roles have position amended to the role name. For example, trequartista spans across 3 different positions, so attacking midfield, forward and winger, so you can sort of see that those are appended onto trequartista. Another option to choose your roles other than selecting from the all roles option here is to select the roles within a position. So I should take note here the wide midfielder roles and what a wide midfielder really is. So that counts for both right and left midfield and right and left attacking midfield positions because they share the same roles. And not to be confused with the attacking midfield roles, which is just for the central attacking midfield. So you can go to any position, like defensive midfield here, and select any of the roles within the defensive midfield position. So like anchor or deep line playmaker in the defensive playstyle. You can select multiple roles within multiple positions, so we can also select fullback position here and choose a number of different fullback roles. And you can see as you select the roles within the position, it also updates the all roles option. So you can go back in here, deselect the anchor, which also deselects the anchor role from the defensive midfielder roles. There are a few options when you want to clear any of these fields, like if you want to just remove all the fullback options but not all of the options, you can just select the X icon on the input. So that will persist the defensive midfield roles. But if you want to remove all the roles, you have 2 options. You can either click the X on the all roles button or hit the clear button down here. Another option to select roles, as I talked about at the beginning of the video, is that you can create a tactic, and that will select all the roles within that tactic. So let's go do that. So you can either click the link here to the tactics, or you can go up to the dashboard link and select tactics, whatever you fancy. So you'll be brought to this list of tactics, but obviously don't have any, you just signed up. So you can click on the add tactic button and you'll be brought to the tactic creation screen. This is where I mentioned that you can emulate your in-game Football Manager tactics. So when you go to run scores on roles, it's easy to switch between the selected roles you wish to calculate by selecting one of your tactics, other than having to go through each one of the roles in that role selection screen. So somewhat laid out like Football Manager, you can select a position and you can select the roles within that position just like the roles selection screen. So once you have essentially 11 positions selected, you'll sort of see a screen more like this here where you can't select any more. If you want to remove one, you can do this, select one again and pick whatever you want. You can give your tactic a name. I would suggest whatever you have within the game. So I'm going to call it my best tactic. I've never used this tactic before. And so once you're all done here, you can click the create tactic button. And this will bring you back to the tactic screen where you can see all of the tactics you've created. I have this handy little design that highlights all the positions selected in the tactic at a glance. You can also hover over each position and see which role was selected for that position. You can also edit a tactic either by going to the action menu and selecting edit, or just clicking on the tactic itself. You can also delete a tactic either from this screen, or you can also do it from the action menu here and click delete. So if you want to clear all of the selections, you can do by clicking the clear button. But if you just want to change one role, you can do so, just like I did previously. And if once you're all done editing, you can click edit tactic and this will again bring you back and you will see the changes that we made right there. So let's go back to the file we just uploaded. So we go back to our My Files, you can see the file here, and we click on it, we will be brought back to the role selection screen. As to get to see the table, you need to select at least one role, and we currently have no role selected, so let's select some roles. So here we're going to select the tactic we just created, my best tactic, and you can see it's pre-populated all of the roles into all the positions. You can see all the roles are here, and for each position you can see which roles are at it. So with all these roles selected, again you can edit any of these if you want. If you're like, well, actually I don't really care about the sweeper keeper, I'm just going to do goalkeeper instead, even though that's not my tactic. But it gives you the option to throw in your tactic and maybe make little changes here and there if you maybe want to see the slight differences between certain roles in the same position. Let's click the submit button and get to the real fun stuff, the table. Now there is a lot of information here with a lot of different columns, so due to that there is some horizontal scrolling, as you see here, so it goes quite a bit. So let's go through some of these columns and what you can do with these columns and what they mean. You see here that the name column is highlighted. The reason being is that this is like a sticky column, so as you scroll to the right, it will stick to the left. So it's handy for whenever you want to look at a value, but also see the name that's referencing, so you're not having to scroll back and forward. You'll see in each of these columns there are multiple different types of inputs just below the column name. I'm going to go over what some of these are. So the first one is a sort of text one, which you can see a name, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to search for a certain player, like I'm just looking here at Dan Gosling, I can search for Dan Gosling or anyone that has Go in their name. So next one is positions, which is this drop down select. It's a multiple selection. Now I have went back and forth in whether I'm happy about how this is implemented, so I'm very open to any feedback you may have about this. So this drop down lists all of the positions. So selecting multiple at the moment will return any players that can play any of the selected positions and not all of the selected positions. Honestly, if your initial instinct is that it should filter on players that can play all of the selected positions and not either of the selected positions, do let me know and I can maybe update that logic. So for example, if I select goalkeeper and centre back, it's going to give me anyone that can play goalkeeper or centre back and not goalkeeper and centre back. Onto the edge column here, you have two filter inputs, one for min, one for max. So you can select a min age of a player to say, they need to be at least 20 years old. And you can sort of see here that this number up here stipulates the total number of players in the file, and the number down here is the total number of players that are within the table. So you filter out here, 700 odd results by doing that. There's also a max age, so you can select the max someone can be is 25 years old. And you can mix these two together by making a range, so the players must be between and including the ages of 20 and 25. You can filter on multiple columns, so I can filter on age, but I can also filter on position, so I want all goalkeepers between the ages of 20 and 25. With all these multiple filters, you may want to quickly, instead of clicking on an X here just to remove the position, you may want to remove all of the filters. You can do so by clicking this reset button, which removes all filters. It's also mentioned that you'll see in the vast majority of columns in this table, you can also sort by ascending or descending order. So if you wanted to find the oldest player in the player range, you can do so by clicking on those arrows. This will initially set the sort order to be descending, but if you want to sort ascending, so finding the youngest player in the list, you can click on this again. And if you click once more, it will remove any of the sorting. You can also go over to the action menu here on each column, and you can also set the sort order here. You can also hide the column if you want. So you can do it so like that there, and if you want to add the column back, if you go for this view button over here, you can actually see any ones that are checked or the columns that are visible. So you can hide as many as you want, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to show them all. You also have the height column, which in my export within Football Manager I use the centimeter unit, but if you happen to use the feet unit, it's quite important to note how this works. So if you want to find someone that has a minimum height of 6'1", you would enter 6.01 rather than 6.1, as that would be 6'10". In a similar vein, we have the weight column. If you use the stones option in Football Manager preferences like I do, the weight comes back in a string format with the number of stones and then the number of pounds. So if you want to find someone with the max weight of 10 stone and 1 pound, you would enter 10.01 instead of 10.1, because that is 10 stone and 10 pounds and not 10 stone and 1 pound. Hopefully that makes sense. I know that can be a little confusing, but the next one I probably want to note is the transfer value. Due to the transfer value potentially being a range, the min and max filters work a little bit different. This is another scenario where if you have any feedback, I'm very open to hearing it. The minimum input here, the way it works, is it checks the right side of the range, essentially the max transfer value. So if you add a value more than the max value of the player's transfer value range, that player will be filtered out. So if you use sort of Vinton Evans here, so if we do 450,000, he will appear, but if we do 450,001, he gets filtered out. All make sense? The maximum transfer value works by checking the left side of the range, essentially the minimum transfer value. So if you had a value less than the min value of the player's transfer value range, that player gets filtered out. So again, we'll use Vinton Evan here. I know, so we're looking at, so at max, the 45,000, still included, but if we do, we'll do 44,000, he gets filtered out. That makes sense. I don't know how I feel about that one. That one's I probably went back and forward on how that I feel that one makes the most sense in my head. So the next set of columns we're going to look at is the real meat of the table, and that is all the role scores. So you can see of all the roles that we selected in the previous screen on the role selection all appear here. And you can see the scores are all rated out of 20. So obviously the higher they are, the better that they can play that role. So let's look at an example of how you can use this data to help power your recruitment. So we'll look at the central defender here in the cover role. So we can sort that, and we can see the top rated player is Alexandru Eperianu, who's at a 12.61, and the next closest player is Oliver Casey, who's at 12.3. So a little bit of daylight, but not so much. So you might be thinking, so how do I choose between these two players? So you can use some of the other granular data here that you provided. So like transfer value, wage, even something like their age or even their height when it comes to central defender anyway. But they're pretty close in height, but you can see there's a difference in age. Oliver Casey is more likely to improve and probably end up better than Imperianu. So you may also want to find someone who can play the central defender role quite well, but is also quite good as an inverted wingback. So let's have a look at, you can sort of see here that the max in this range is 13.01. So just curious who that is. So there's just one of them here, and that is Harry Clifton. He's a good point behind where Eperianu was as a central defender cover, but he's a pretty handy inverted wingback. But can he play either of those positions? And the answer is no. He's actually just a midfielder. So this can highlight players who are actually quite adept at a certain role, but can't actually play the position that role is attached to. This sort of gives you insight where you might want to sign this player to play in that role, so you might train them to play in that role, or there may be a player in your squad already, and you may want them trained in that position so they can really get the best out of that role. So off the back of that, there are two other columns I should mention here, and they're both related to the best roles. So there is the best role for the position that the player can play, like so if you use Harry Clifton here, so his best role is centre midfielder in the support style because he can just play in the midfield, even though his best role out of score is inverted wingback, but he can't play as a fullback or a wingback, so therefore he's assigned this. So this is where the overall best role column comes in. So it takes the best role irrespective of what position the player can play in. As well as these role-based scores, there are some opinionated computed scores that I've created myself from the old days of my spreadsheets. These are some scores that take the average value from a range of different attributes to get a score. So first up we have the technical column, which is a computed attribute for a player's technical aptitude. So this column calculates the average from the player's technical attributes. This covers goalkeeping attributes for goalkeepers and outfield attributes for outfielders. Similar to the technical column, we have the mental column, which, as I just said out loud, sounds kind of wrong out of context, but this is the average from the player's mental attributes. And we also have the physical column. So if you're scouting for an absolute tank who can run the 100-meter sprint in 10 seconds, this is the column you're looking for. There's also the total column, which is just the average of all the player's attributes. So we have this set pieces column. This highlights a player's ability to attack from set pieces and calculates the average from the player's jump and reach and bravery attributes. Was tempted to add in head in here, so let me know if you think I should. The speed column calculates the average from the player's acceleration, agility and pace attributes. Then we have the tenacity column, which highlights a player's physical tenacity and calculates the average from the player's work rate and stamina attributes. And the final column is feet, which highlights a player's both-footedness. I'm unsure if that's actually a word, but I'm throwing it in there. So for each foot, a player has a sort of text value, and I've mapped that value to a number, as you see in the table here. So if their left foot is weak and their right foot is very strong, the total score will be 12, as weak is 2 and very strong is 10. One of the newer features I talked about earlier that stopped me from releasing this earlier is this player detail panel. So if we want to have a little bit more granular detail on a player, we can click on a player's name. This will bring up this little side panel. You can expand it to go almost full screen if you want to have a little bit more detail there. So you can view here all of the attributes, similar to how it's laid out in Football Manager. You can also see the computer attributes all listed here. You can see all of the roles that you selected and their score for it here, and also the best roles. It also includes their second and third best role. Again, this is for the position that they can play, not their overall best role. On this table, you can also adjust the number of rows you want per page. So if you want to shrink it down, you don't want to see too many players, you can do so. There is pagination, which is quite snappy because all the data is already been loaded, so it doesn't have to sort of do any loading. And you can jump back to the first or jump to the last. If you need to update any of the roles, you can do so by clicking the Update Roles button. And so if we come in here, just say we actually want to go back and actually, if you just select my best tactic, you'll see the sweeper keeper score instead of the goalkeeper score. So we click on Submit here. This will recalculate it. We can go back to the goalkeeper, and you'll see the sweeper keeper one here listed instead of the goalkeeper we had before. So if you've gotten this far through all my waffling, I really do appreciate it and hope it's inspired you to give FMDataLab a try. I'm up for any suggestions, feedback, and if you come across any issues at all, do not hesitate to reach out to me. For more FMDataLab videos, be sure to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope it's full of scouting and analysing data on FMDataLab. Bye for now.